from my right to my left, we have Rina Shahande, which is pronounced phonetically apparently, our Deputy City Attorney from Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. Next to her is An Trung, her Supervising Attorney from the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. Next to An is Lester Ramos. He's from the Filipino Migrant Center, leader, and he's a survivor advocate. Welcome. And next, across the table behind me to my left, I hope I'm not blocking her, is Heidi Olson. Easiest name ever, thank you, Heidi. And she's a sexual assault nurse examiner, program manager with Children's Mercy Hospital. And finally, Stephen Lambert. He's a prevention coordinator for the Orange County Department of Education.
Okay.
Perfect, okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for staying this late. Hope everyone's still awake. Awesome. So my name's Rina Shahande. I am a Deputy City Attorney with the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. I am a prosecutor, and I prosecuted my first case in 1999, and I know you're wondering, how did they let people prosecute when they were only 8 years old? But thanks for laughing. But I think I can speak to where we've been, and fortunately, I can also tell you where we are and where we're going. So I'm really privileged to be in that position. What I'm going to try to do today is to make a case to all of you on not staying in your lane. And as a trial lawyer, I'm used to making my case to 12 people at a time, so I'm going to do my best, but bear with me here. The program that I'm part of is a really good example of not staying in your lane. It is the Sex and Labor Trafficking Program, or SALT for those government people who love their acronyms. We certainly love ours. You see before you 2 of the 3 members of SALT. It consists, oh, we don't have that picture. Oh, okay. It consists of An and myself and our paralegal extraordinaire, Cindy Martinez-Lewis. We were formed in 2017 under the leadership of City Attorney Mike Feuer. When I say it's an example of not staying in your lane, let me explain what our office does. For those of you who aren't familiar with our City Attorney's Office, half of our office is the criminal branch and the other half, approximately, is the civil branch. So the civil attorneys, they defend city departments and police officers, firefighters, all of that. That's our civil side. Our criminal side, which is where we are, our jurisdiction is to prosecute adult misdemeanor offenses that occur within the limits of the City of Los Angeles. To give you an idea of how big that is, the City of Los Angeles, I believe, is about 4 million people, so it's a large jurisdiction. But nonetheless, we don't deal with juveniles, we don't deal with felonies. Human trafficking, straight felony. So why do we exist? Computers. Does this work? Okay. I think I need to shake it every now and then. And to kind of explain this, I think it's helpful to look at the 5 Ps framework. And I know we talked about the 3 Ps. We kind of like the 5 Ps also. There's prevention, protection, policy, partnerships, and at the very end, we put prosecution. And I'll give you a little background on that. When I say I know where we've been, when I first started prosecuting cases, as you can imagine, a lot of our adult misdemeanor cases were prostitution cases. And back in 1999, and for several years after that, I worked in an arraignment court, as a lot of my colleagues did, and we saw prostitution cases come through our court, one after the other. And mostly women, most of them took a plea deal, and we moved on. And it's kind of an embarrassment that that's how it used to be, because we saw people with these extreme mandatory minimum sentences that didn't exist in a lot of violent felonies. And human trafficking, in 1999, we hadn't even heard of human trafficking. We didn't even have the TVPA yet. None of that existed. So where have we come since then? We started to see diversion programs 2008 to 2010. We started diversion programs, so people would still plead to these offenses, but they would get to go to a program and have their case dismissed. And to a large extent, we still have these programs, but when we started this program to combat human trafficking, we said, well, what can we do to help the women who are victims of human trafficking, who are forced to commit prostitution offenses? What can we do for that? And early on, when we started the unit, I went on a ride-along with a human trafficking task force. And the goal of the task force was to rescue juvenile victims of sex trafficking. So we went out on one of the well-known tracks for prostitution, and we stopped and we were talking to a group of young women who were standing on the street, who were wearing next to nothing and looked extremely young. None of them were actually juveniles, but they looked extremely young. And I was able to talk to one of them, and I asked her about her situation, and I asked her what it would take to get her out of this life. And she said, what am I going to do, go work at McDonald's? And that was heartbreaking to me. That was heartbreaking because I realized that it wasn't enough to give someone the tools to get out of the life, assuming they have the ability to do so. But how do you keep them going? So it's a big problem, right? So this is how we in the city of Los Angeles are trying to protect victims of sex trafficking. In 2019, we used a grant to start a pilot program called Project Beacon. Now, Project Beacon, I will say, I talked to An and I said, can we have a name that's not an acronym, please? Please, no acronym. And he came up with the name Beacon, and it stands for a beacon of hope. It has nothing to do with an acronym or a government. It doesn't sound like a government program. It's not a government program in that sense. But we have partnered with an organization called Journey Out. They run a fantastic diversion program. And we said, what can you do to get people into a program before they ever have a criminal record? Because we know criminal records hold people back. How do we do that? And we worked with them to create an 8-session program that is an empowerment program to enable women who have been arrested for commercial sex-related offenses, to get them into this empowerment program to hopefully not only identify victims of human trafficking, who we know don't usually identify as victims right away. They can go through this program. They can realize that there are resources out there available to them, even if they are victims. There are people who can help them get away from their traffickers. There are resources to help them get their identification documents. A lot of them don't have birth certificates, driver's licenses, et cetera. These have all been taken from them. So they're a resource to help them with that. And because we know that even once they've been removed from the situation, they still may have trouble staying out of the life because they're looking at minimum wage jobs, because they know nothing else. We partnered more recently with the City of Los Angeles WorkSource Centers and Goodwill Industries. It's escaping me. We partnered basically with the WorkSource development organizations. And now we have resources available both to get college educations, not just GEDs, not just high school degrees, college educations, high-paying jobs, union jobs, even government jobs. People are hooked up to legal services so that they can do things like vacating criminal histories, which is another function that our office plays, is we facilitate vacatur petitions where people are able to basically wipe their entire slate clean if they were the victim of human trafficking and forced to commit crimes. So now that we have all of these services, we're able to address some of the ancillary problems that arise from human trafficking, like, for instance, homelessness. We actually can find housing for many of the women who come through the program and enable them to live stable lives so that they can rebuild, and also for their children. So these programs are incredibly promising, and I think they are a sign of what's going to come. Hopefully they will expand to other areas, but I hope this kind of gets you thinking about ways that you can look at the problem of human trafficking through a variety of lenses, and hopefully not just stay in your lane. Thank you.
So just to add to what Rena had mentioned, if you go to our old school prosecutors, we shouldn't exist because they really think city prosecutors only handle misdemeanors and that's the end of it. They don't realize that we do other things, and I'll get into some of our civil enforcement actions that are pretty unique. But really what Rena has mentioned is really our office's evolution from the old, we just prosecute misdemeanors and it's primarily prostitution and that's it, and don't bother us with anything else, to, if you know City Attorney Mike Fewer, that is completely unacceptable if you ever say that's how we did it and that's what we're going to stick to. Mike Fewer will say, what's the problem and how do we fix it and how do we do better? And so that was the challenge that he placed on our office. And as you can see, our office is trying to expand from that traditional prosecutor model to this victim-centered approach, to this realization that we may be prosecutors, but look at all the other things that we could be doing. Look at all the other partners out there that we can collaborate with. So I want to give kudos to Rena because especially with the Project Sustain, the career counseling portion, that portion is so important to provide the path of sustainable recovery. We cannot be, I heard questions earlier, what happens when people age out, right, with services? I would love to get to the point where it's not fast food jobs, that we've given them career counseling, some stable employment with benefits, and they can take care of themselves and their family. So that's such a huge part of the programs that we've sprung on. Now the other portion I want to flip around is we volunteered to be the chairs of the labor trafficking subcommittee of the LA Regional Task Force. And I'm flipping because when we say human trafficking right now, most folks still think we're talking about sex trafficking. And that's why our office's program is sex and labor trafficking, just to make the point that there are other forms of trafficking going on. As to labor, the big question has always been, why is it that we see sex trafficking cases and yet very few labor trafficking cases? What's going on with that? So we attempted to kind of crack the nut. We chaired this committee, we convened folks together, and so I'll go through some of the things that we're doing, but I want, if this works, to give you a glimpse of this Today show that aired last year, and it actually did a very good job in capturing, for folks who have never had any encounters or experiences with labor trafficking, it's a very good intro. So I'd love to, okay, can we play that? There we go.
Because of this. This is an advertisement targeted towards victims of human trafficking. It wants the victims to call this national human trafficking hotline. And the reason it's here in the bathroom is this is one of the only places trafficking victims are ever alone.
From LA, we flew to Washington, D.C., where those calls are answered.
This is where it all happens. Folks are reaching out 24 hours a day, seeking assistance, leaving trafficking situations.
The police are aware of the situation.
Calls come in from all over the country and involve potential victims from all over the world. The International Labor Organization says over 40 million people are trafficked worldwide, the vast majority in labor slavery. That includes jobs in domestic service, farm work, restaurants, construction, and service industries.
Do you have the name of that friend?
You may get more sex trafficking calls, but that is not necessarily reflective of what type of trafficking is the majority of trafficking in the United States.
Yes.
Labor trafficking has to do with being forced against your will to work. You thought you were going to be a manager. It turns out you're actually being forced to be a maid.
Back in Los Angeles, attorney Panita Razanka works on behalf of trafficking victims at the Thai Community Development Center here.
The majority of cases that I see are labor trafficking cases. A lot of times they go and work at a restaurant and they're not being paid correctly, but then they feel like they can't go anywhere else, and many times victims don't self-identify as victims.
Even though they might be what is essentially a slave.
Right.
Not far from Panita's office, we went to meet some of the trafficking victims she's represented.
Hi, Jacob.
This house in East Hollywood is where a handful of 1,100 trafficked migrant Thai farm workers live today.
If you wanted to go home to Thailand, were you able to go home?
I couldn't because they took our passport.
They took everybody's passport. Everybody's passport they took away?
They lived and worked in conditions just like these in Hawaii and Washington State. They were each given $9 a day to live on, but that stopped after a month. Because it wasn't what they were promised, they asked for help from fellow Thai immigrants and arranged for a labor attorney to visit the farm. And the traffickers found out.
The supervisor actually came back with some security guards with guns. They had short guns and long guns.
Eventually, the U.S. granted them T visas, which are given to trafficking victims. And they were able to bring their wives and children over from Thailand.
What did it make you think about and feel when you hear that your parents had such a tough time in order to give you this life here living in L.A.?
Like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's very hard to describe.
Hard to describe because evidence can be ambiguous and potential victims afraid to talk. As producer Arnie Hakel and I found out in Monterey Park, just outside of LA.
Arnie was tipped off from a source that there are human trafficking victims living in an apartment, where? Right over there, right on that corner?
Yeah, it's right down the street.
Okay, so here's the building. I'm a journalist. This is my colleague. We're doing a story about the economy in the area.
你有没有这个经验？有 Yeah. Okay, so he says he's been promised a lot and it hasn't panned out.
老板非常坏的。
He says bosses here are very bad.
The bosses are very bad.
He says American bosses are better, but the Chinese bosses are very bad.
To speak more freely, he came out on the sidewalk with us.
肯定少一点。
So he says a lot of times the Chinese bosses, in his experience, they haven't paid him what they said they were going to pay him. He says he's only here for about 20 days, then he's off to Florida, then he's off to New York. He's working all over the country.
If you wanted to leave and you wanted to go back to China, could you go?
As soon as we asked that question, he told us he left something on the stove. So we followed him, and we were greeted by a man who had been inside that same apartment.
Okay, shut up! Take it away!
Okay.
We don't have any idea.
It was clearly time to leave. So we headed to show our footage to Deputy Los Angeles.
I apologize for this part.
Trung, who heads an anti-labor trafficking task force.
He seemed to be very free to talk about it until you asked about China.
There are some signs that this might be a trafficking situation, but he's not wearing handcuffs. He's not trapped inside this building. How do we know for sure?
And that's the challenge, because this is not a physical force situation. Remember, coercion takes different forms.
You know, so we're all watching that piece there, Jacob, and we're wondering if you suspect that someone might be in a situation where they're being forced to work against their will, what are the signs?
And that's the thing. It's not always literal confinement, somebody being held prisoner somewhere, but like in the case of that gentleman, and I should say we don't know for sure if he's being trafficked, people leaving town constantly and coming back and doing a bunch of different jobs.
So I wanted to show that piece because it's a great intro to hiding in plain sight. And I think that is one of the primary differences. With sex trafficking, prostitution, at least now, is still illegal. So that gives you an indicator of something going on. With labor trafficking, if you're walking into a restaurant, let's say, it's otherwise lawful activity. So you have to do a lot more work to figure out what's going on. So in the regional task force, just quickly, and Derek and Sandy know this, the two main prongs that we work on are expanding the eyes and ears. And so there's all these outreach efforts that we do, but we've also been a little more strategic about getting academics, economists, other folks that we normally don't have in this discussion, and trying to create a safe space for folks to really share their ideas. And we keep expanding that portion, but we are looking to eyes that are already out there, for instance, like code inspectors, folks who are already out and about in different locations. As law enforcement, as you may know, we have to do a search warrant or go through those processes in order to get access, and other folks don't. They operate under administrative guidelines, other guidelines, and so if we can train them to be sensitized, they can also be additional eyes. Now the other piece, that's the strategic training. The other piece is really the systematic detection, and so this gets into very technical things. I won't get too deep into it, but the whole idea is to not wait for the perfect victim. And so we addressed, I think, with our strong partnerships, a situation that law enforcement complained about years ago, which is no one comes forward. When they finally do, it's 5 years old. We're starting to get much more timely tips, but again, it's not perfect. So we're making better headway for that portion. Let me see. So some of the data projects, and this is where it gets very technical, but we've worked with organizations to analyze their, like CAS, Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, their own information. They apparently were sitting on about 500 plus cases of labor trafficking, and so we were able to start analyzing that. We've moved on to other projects with the agricultural industry, working with UCLA, we're working with USC. So those will hopefully get to the point where we're not waiting for the victim who's stabilized, who's gotten all the support services, who's willing to come forward and be the perfect witness at trial. We're trying to move forward to get the information so that we can prosecute. And I want to end on finally the profound question that actually Sandy Morgan asked us when we initially did a podcast for ending human trafficking. And she said, what is justice for the victims? And reflexively, I said, well, of course we prosecute. And Sandy said, well, but you do civil prosecution. It's not about jail. And so, of course, she made me think, but really think about that question, because what we're coming up in the Labor Trafficking Subcommittee is the answer isn't necessarily to put traffickers in jail. That is always what prosecutors want to do, but in our office, we do civil prosecution where we get court orders, we change how businesses operate, we shut down motels and things like that. But Sandy is getting to what does it mean for the victim? And some victims, as we're learning, don't want jail time. They don't want to refer. They don't want to make a big deal. They just want to get some compensation and move on with their lives. And so in that respect, our office has done other things where it's wage theft instead of labor trafficking. Our office has supported AB 629, which is the Victims Restitution bill that allows victims of human trafficking, labor trafficking specifically, to seek compensation if they submit proper documentation. And I'm going to start speaking sideways. But those are the things that I think really fulfill this part of it, which is what is justice for the victim. And I think that's what we come back to. And it's sort of getting out of, I'm a prosecutor, I'm supposed to be prosecuting. But I think really the question and discussion that you're all engaged in is, it's much, much bigger than any of us. Much, much bigger than any of our agencies, and that's why collaboration is so crucial. So thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Lester Ramos. I'm Filipino Migrant Center leader and survivor advocate. Before I share, to share to you what I'm doing, let me share my story. Life in the Philippines is not easy, so I grow up with a simple life. So when I get married and having 2 kids, I decided to work abroad because I started to have financial hardship. So I saw a placement agency that gave me opportunity to work in US, but to do that I need to pay $6,000 for the process. But $6,000 is a huge money. So I borrow some money from my families, relatives, and also in the lending company, which associate with the placement agency. So when I arrived in the US, I find out that the promised job is not true. Instead of working in Tennessee as an amusement park worker, they sent me to Alabama to be a fast food crew, which is I earn is not enough to pay my lending in the Philippines. Is enough only in the basic needs of my family. So when the lending company started to harass my family because we not able to pay it, so I decided to escape to look for other job and go to California. I end up to be undocumented, so I work in home care facility. But my employer take advantage of me because I'm documented. She told me that I'm not able to go outside to walking on the street because maybe police ask my ID and I will, if I don't have ID to show, maybe they will gonna deport me. So I'm really scared. So I stay in the home care facility inside. Even my day off, I'm working for 3 years. I never go out because I really scared. Then 2014, I found the Filipino Migrant Center, which me I learned that I'm human trafficking victims. They helped me to process my paper. And 2016, I got my T visa. And the help of Salvation Army as well. In 2016, I reunite my family. Yeah. But back then, when I'm undocumented, when I'm inside of only the facility, I'm thinking with my family. There's only one question in my mind. Are you able to see my family? When I gonna see my family again? In 5 years, 10 years? Or takes forever to meet them again? Because I prefer to sacrifice than to see my family starving to death. Because I'm not able to go home, because I will not back what I used to. I'm not going back to my job because I'm getting older. And also, how can I pay all the debt? I live in the Philippines, so I prefer to sacrifice here. Prefer not to seeing them in person, but I effort to send money for them to live, to survive. And I think that time is like, this is my choice. I have to face the consequences of my decision. But when I learned, the Filipino Migrant Center giving me the workshop, education about the rights and workers' rights and everything about human trafficking, I realized, no, it's not my choice. We are victim. Being victim is not a choice. Whose father wants to leave their kids and work to the foreign country? Who somebody wants to leave their family to work in a foreign country? Not seeing them every night, every day, worrying them when they sick, when they get accident. You only able to send money, but you can give your, as a father, more support for your kids, to kiss them, to hug them, to see their first school, first walk, first smile, and even first call Papa. So it's so hard. That's the mental hardship I encounter to separate with family. It's burden me. It's hard for me to think about that. So when every time I look my family, they give me motivation to fight for human trafficking, to speak out, to stand up, and to do something, to educate community about human trafficking. Human trafficking is serious crime, which the victim is experience physically and mental hardship. It's like a system that the powerful and wealthy individuals or person use innocent people for the profit. Can you imagine that? They don't care about people, they care about the profit. Now, I belong in one organization like Migrante USA, alliances of different immigrant and migrant workers. Our goal is to uphold the rights and welfare of the worker. Is countrywide. So we have 18 member organization in different states. So I'm Deputy Secretary General. And one of our campaign is Stop Human Trafficking. So we speak, we share our story, we speak the churches in the school, and yeah. And we reached out the possible victim of human trafficking to help them, to encourage them to come out, to speak out. Because they are not criminal to hide. They are victims. We must help them and encourage them to fight to seek justice. Because it's important to them to reunite for their family. Because I experienced how hard is that. Now in the we already helped 50 families reunited, a victim of human trafficking. And right now we continue reaching people, a victim of human trafficking. Now we're helping 7 farm workers that traffic in, I forgot the place, in going to Sacramento. It's like they're picking the fruits. Yeah, their job is picking the fruit. And yeah, we're helping them. And now we just, sometimes we just go to the door to door, just knock, and then giving flyers if you are victim of human trafficking, so we can, yeah, we can connect it with Salvation Army, with different organizations helping human trafficking. So I really glad to see a lot of people that unite together and come together to stop human trafficking. To see that, because to talk about human trafficking and how to stop human trafficking is overwhelmed for me, because I know how serious the human trafficking, how serious the problem of human trafficking. Because if we not do anything, they will continue using people for the profit. They continue to, a lot of people will separate for their family. Not only separate the family, but some of other victims of human trafficking experience exploitation, abuses. Some of them even rape or killed in the process of working in the foreign country. That's why always this thing, when I think of this thing, I always motivate me to remove my nervous to speak a lot of people. Because my weakness is to speak of people. I remember before, even 10 people, I'm not able to speak. But I always thinking the message that I'm able to share. So I will not be nervous because the importance of the message. Because I believe that community deserve to learn the truth. So thank you, and continue to unite to fight human trafficking. Because if we unite together, if you come together, we will do something. And hoping to stop the human trafficking. Thank you very much.
That was really powerful. And I think it's a really good reminder that we are talking about human beings here. I think sometimes it's easy to conceptualize all of this or, kind of get into the science or the facts, and really it's humans that we're talking about. So to explain the population that I'm going to talk to you guys about, I want to explain my job a little bit. So I manage a team of sexual assault nurse examiners, and we're a very specialized type of forensic nursing. So I work at a children's hospital in Kansas City. Kansas City is a weird place for multiple reasons, but it's on a state line, so that makes it really complicated. So we're seeing kids in Missouri and Kansas, but there are very few pediatric sexual assault nurse examiners in the world. There are about less than 500 who are certified. So kids are coming from 6-7 hours away to be seen by us because these services just don't exist in rural communities. So what the community I'm taking care of are kids specifically, 18 and under, who have been sexually assaulted and are living in the Midwest. Some of these kids live in urban areas, a lot of them in rural areas. So that's sort of the snapshot that I'm going to show you. And it's pretty alarming what we're seeing in terms of trends. And I think that these trends really exist probably throughout the United States. So something that's important to think about is that when we talk about research with sex trafficking, the vast majority of it has been done on adults, and that makes sense. It's much easier to study adults. They can give consent, they can explain things better, they understand processes that are complicated like grooming a lot better, they can conceptualize those types of things. Kids can't really do that, and it's really hard to get consent, and this is already a vulnerable population. So it makes sense why a lot of research has been focused on adults. However, kids are not adults. We all recognize this. So imagine you had a study where we're trying a new medication and we try it out on adults and we're like, great, that works. Let's give it to kids. And we give them the same dose. Is that going to go great? No, it could kill them, right? Because their bodies are smaller, they metabolize things differently. So we know, logically, we can't apply what's worked with an adult to a kid. The same thing is happening with sex trafficking. So let me tell you what's happening in ERs across the United States. You have a kid come in and maybe there's a few things that seem kind of shady about their story. So say it's a 13-year-old who's saying, I want to be tested for STDs, and they're alone, and the nurses are like, this is weird. Maybe they're being trafficked. Okay, what does trafficking look like? So they Google it, because there's been no education that's been given in this hospital, and up pops all the adult signs of trafficking. Tattoos, have to work to meet a quota, they may have injuries, come in with a controlling adult. Yes, those things are true of adults, right? That is evidence-based research. But this kid hasn't gotten there yet. They're just starting to be groomed into trafficking. So guess what? No tattoos, no one's with them, they're not saying they're being trafficked, they seem fine, so no, trafficking's not happening. See ya. And wrong. They missed a victim. And that is what we have found in our hospital is we're looking for adult signs. A lot of the kids that are coming in that we're seeing are being commercially sexually exploited, have not gotten there yet. They don't have the overt signs of trafficking. So we have to look at risk factors. We have to look at their social history, their trauma, their ACEs, those types of things to really say, yeah, we think this kid is high risk, or yes, this kid is being trafficked. So the trends that we are seeing with kids is a lot of them, of course, this is a theme we've heard all day. A lot of these kids have experienced lots of trauma. Most of them are in state custody. They're runaways, they're throwaways. Almost every single one of these kids, and obviously the ones we're seeing, have a long history of childhood sexual abuse. A couple weeks ago, one of our nurses saw a 13-year-old, very high risk for trafficking, and she told our nurse, oh yeah, I've been raped 11 times in my lifetime already, mostly by my mom's boyfriends. And these are the stories we hear over and over and over again, that these kids have a long history of sexual abuse that makes them extremely vulnerable. A lot of these kids, right, their needs aren't getting met, they're isolated. We're also asking them about pornography. And a lot of these kids who are being trafficked or again are high risk are saying, yeah, I watch porn all the time. So again, normalizing sexual violence, and then that sexual violence starts happening to them. Social media is the #1 way traffickers are targeting kids in the United States. I would say 98% of kids that we know are being trafficked by a trafficker have met them online. I took care of a 16-year-old being trafficked from Wisconsin. They were going to Arizona, stopped in Kansas City to make some money. She did not even know her trafficker's name, that she had met him online, and she called him Babes. So that's a story we see repeatedly as well. We also see kids being targeted from every socioeconomic class, race, across the board. Traffickers will use any vulnerability. Other things that we see, so diagnoses that you may see, so their reproductive health system is being affected, right? Kids with multiple sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy, that type of thing is a risk factor. Mental health conditions, a lot of kids who are being trafficked in the Midwest also are testing positive for meth. Some kids have injuries, but a lot of them don't. Again, they don't have a lot of these overt signs yet. A lot of them come in alone, so I get asked that a lot. Well, how do you separate kids from a trafficker? I've never had to. Traffickers aren't bringing kids in because it would actually raise more red flags a lot of the time if, so why is your uncle bringing you in instead of your legal guardian, right? So a lot of times they're just dropping these kids off, or it's an emergency that brought them in. I took care of a 14-year-old girl who was in a motor vehicle accident. So first responders brought her in, and all of a sudden we started seeing she tested positive for meth, all of these huge red flags, and she was being trafficked by a trafficker who, as far as I know, is being charged on federal charges. So a lot of these kids look normal. If I lined up all the kids in our ER right now and said, which one's being trafficked? I guarantee none of us would be able to pick it out because, again, they look really normal. So what we have to do is ask the right questions. So this is what we're asking. This comes from a validated screening tool. So there is a doctor named Jordan Greenbaum. She's awesome. She works in Atlanta. She used this screening tool in 120 different medical facilities. And what she found was that it's highly sensitive, but it's not highly specific. So what that means is that if kids are saying yes to 2 or more of these questions, we should be saying high risk. There's something going on with them that probably they're likely going to be exploited or victimized. And then on the back page, we ask actual questions about exploitation. Kids don't know we're asking about trafficking, right? They have no idea what these questions are for, and they're really honest. So what we're getting is a lot of positive screening tools. So what we're saying is, have you ever been hurt by someone you're in a relationship with physically? Have you been knocked out? Have you ever run away from home or been kicked out of your house? Have you been involved with the police? Have you used drugs or alcohol in the last 6 months? Have you ever had sex because you wanted to? How many partners have you had? Have you had a sexually transmitted infection? So if a 14-year-old comes in and says, oh yeah, I've been pregnant once, I've been in trouble with the police, I've run away from home, red flags should be jumping off this kid's chart, right? Is this child being exploited? Here are our actual exploitation questions. So has somebody else forced you to have sex? Have you ever had to do some kind of sex act in public? Have you ever had to pose in a sexy way for a photo or a video? Or have you actually had to trade a sex act for something of value? And a lot of kids say yes to these questions, and we report it. So does this work? Yes. In 2015, we had no formal education, we didn't have a screening tool, we identified 2 trafficking victims. Last year, we rolled out this trafficking screen with all of our SANE nurses, so every teenage sexual abuse victim that comes into our ER that our SANE nurses see, some kids will be outside of the time frame to be seen, get this screening tool. So what we found is that 62 out of 134 teenagers we saw last year screened positive. That's 46% of the teenage kids we saw come in. That's absurdly high. Now the reality is some of these kids don't have a trafficker, so they're engaging in survival sex, which I don't like that term with kids because it sounds like there's some kind of consent, and they can't consent to transactional sex, right? It's coercive in nature because they're a minor, but let me give you an example of how effective this tool is. So a couple weeks ago, one of our nurses saw a 14-year-old. She had been sexually drugged and sexually assaulted at a party. So that's why she was coming in. She's in foster care, right? So she's already jumping off the charts with our screening tool here. But we asked these questions to her. So she was not identifying as a sex trafficking victim. Nobody thought she was being trafficked. They just thought, here's a kid who's high risk that was sexually assaulted. And then we asked her those questions about exploitation. Have you traded sex for something? And she's like, oh yeah, I trade sex for money all the time. And her nurse is like, so this is separate from, the sexual abuse. Oh yeah, this is how I'm making money to pay for my cell phone. So we're like, okay, now we have 2 things going on. You're victimized over here at this party. Also, you are being trafficked, even though there's no trafficker per se. So we hotlined that, obviously reported that. So that screening tool is highly effective, and I'll talk more about it tomorrow at my workshop.
So my name is Steven. My pronouns are he, him, his, and today I'm just going to be talking a bit about health education and sort of what that lens is like, because there's a lot of folks here who are a lot smarter than me who can talk to you about the criminal justice perspective, about the counseling perspective. So I'm here to sort of offer you the health education perspective as my slides are coming up. Now, the prevention aspect came up in a couple of the questions for the panelists earlier, and so I'm hoping that I can address that a bit and talk about what does prevention actually mean, because there was some note about, is the hotline considered prevention? right? And in my view, that's more of an early intervention tool, which is still extremely important. But what I'm talking about is that upstream prevention. So how do we address the risk factors for human trafficking, both labor trafficking and CSAC, all the way up? Okay, so these environmental factors, and there they are, excellent. So what I'm going to do for you is sort of outline what I think the role of health education is in human trafficking prevention, provide you with some data, some local data and indicators to show you what some of the experiences are of the young people in our Orange County community, and hopefully make the case that we belong here to be talking about health education and human trafficking prevention. So when you look at human trafficking, there are really kind of three key risk factors that apply in general. Of course, it does vary from individual to individual, right? Social isolation, trauma, and economic hardship. Those are sort of the universal risk factors that you see in both labor and sex trafficking. Now, if you break those down a little further, however, you start to see some patterns emerge, right? Patterns that I think are highly relevant to health education and prevention. Substance use and mental health disorders, family, peer and dating violence, so bullying, dating violence, and family abuse, and all within this context of marginalization, right? So you see different student groups in there, LGBTQIA+, you have homelessness, foster care, all of these groups, right? Immigration status is another as well, and incarceration. All of these going in multiple directions, right? So you can see the linkages between when someone's experiencing family violence, and we know that that's statistically related to substance use. We know that parental substance use is linked to their children's substance use, right? All of these cycles intermingling. So then how can we make an impact on these risk factors? How can we go further upstream and say, we need to prevent them from ever getting to this point, right? Where can we interrupt these cycles? So in order to do that, I'm going to highlight for you some of the local data from the California Healthy Kids Survey, as well as the Conditions of Children report that Dr. Miharas referenced earlier. And if I could ask you to indulge me in just some mental predictions. So as I go through a few of these charcoal-colored slides, I'd like you to think about what you would expect the data to say. So as Dr. Miharas referenced earlier, youth hospitalizations. So do you think that youth hospitalizations here in Orange County over the last 10 years related to substance abuse, do you think they went up or down? This up for substance abuse? How about for mental illness? Up, very good. So actually, youth hospitalizations for substance use have declined a bit, whereas those for mental illness have increased. If you look at the Conditions of Children data, you see there a very clear trend up at the top for mental illness and overall hospitalizations, but thankfully substance use has declined somewhat. This aligns with California Healthy Kids self-report data. For most substances, you do see a decrease in use and prevalence over time: alcohol, prescription drugs, inhalants. However, you will see two holdouts in there: e-cigarettes and marijuana use, unfortunately tapering upward. The new administration of the survey is going on right now. Unfortunately, national trends are telling us that might increase. But overall, youth substance use is down. That said, our job isn't over. If you look at the connection between substance use and mental illness, we all know from the literature they're very closely interlinked. However, our research at the local level shows that to be true for our students. So students who report substance use are more likely to report experiencing chronic sadness in the past 12 months and more likely to report considering suicide in the past 12 months. The inverse relationship is also true. So students who report experiencing chronic sadness are more likely to report substance use. Same for suicide ideation. So we know that these are very closely linked, and the implications for us who work with students is that we need to be very mindful of if a student is caught vaping or using marijuana on campus, are we assessing for other things going on in their life? Or are we just saying, oh, bust him, we busted him for marijuana, we suspended him and sent him home, right? We have to be very mindful of these, what we're doing in our policies and practices. Now, if you look at the trends over time of seriously considering suicide in the past 12 months, it dipped a little bit and then rose back up in 17-18 for our 9th and 11th graders, which is not great news. One part of this could be more of a willingness to express those thoughts. However, it could also be the prevalence increasing. When we talk about marginalization as well, I do really want to spotlight our LGBTQIA youth, because they are if you look at the literature, they're overrepresented in foster care, they're overrepresented in homelessness, they're overrepresented in so many of these risk profiles, and their rates of substance use are higher, the rates of suffering from mental illnesses are higher, and it's not because of who they are, it's because of the way that they're treated, and it's because of the way that they've been marginalized. And so we as a society have to figure out how can we support and affirm these young people so that they're not so much more likely to report considering suicide, 3 times the rate of their peers who do not identify. All right? This is a crisis. So the second indicator I want to talk to you about is teen dating violence. So I want you to guess in your head what percentage of students when they took this survey, a different survey in 2018, what percentage of them do you think said, I've experienced some sort of teen dating violence or teen dating abuse? What do you think? Less than 25, 25 to 50? So it was actually 69% who reported it, which is shockingly high. It was shocking for me to see that data. This was done by Chapman University in coordination with Laura's House. And to think that over 2/3 of students said that this is an expanded definition, right? Most of these types of assessments are only looking at violent interactions, physical control, coercion, right? This included more subtle things, the emotional, the verbal, the online stalking. So 69% reporting experiences this means that we have a lot of work to do, right, as educators who are providing health education, to discuss with them what are healthy norms? What is a relationship supposed to look like? How can you have agency? So the last indicator I do want to discuss here is homelessness and insecure housing, because I really think that it's easy to overlook what our students are experiencing here in Orange County. So thinking about what percentage of students here in Orange County you think are experiencing insecure housing. So I have 2 little dots there, one for Orange County and one for California. Just mentally think, where do you think Orange County falls, and how do you think it compares to the state average? And I see Jeannie Allery back there going, I know this data. She's doing a workshop tomorrow about homeless student supports with McKinney-Vento. Highly recommend you check it out. Everybody got your guesses in? So it might look a little different than you thought, right? So Orange County, well above the state average in terms of number of students who are experiencing insecure housing. So this is a very real thing. And this is the students who are attending school and are reporting this in their enrollment. This doesn't include all the students who are not even in this system or engaged in school. As you can see, the trend somewhat upward over time. So these are real issues that our students are struggling with that are affecting their life and affecting the risk profile for human trafficking. So moving forward, I just want to talk about what is the role here? Why are we talking about health education? How can it help in this fight? Because we're one small piece in this fight. And it really comes down to this. You look at the outcomes, at OCDE, right, our vision is that all of Orange County students will lead the nation in college and career readiness and success, right? So we're looking at their educational outcomes, but really their life outcomes. We want these students to thrive and be successful, and their education and their health are all so intertwined. If a student is not healthy or happy or safe, they can't thrive academically. And so we know that we need to support all aspects of the child in order to help them to find success. And this is one of my favorite, we've all seen the box infographic of what equity is versus equality. This is, I think, my favorite version, because you have equality where everyone gets the same thing. Equity when you get what you need to be at a level playing field. Justice means you remove the systematic barriers that are requiring the need to have those supports in the first place. And justice is really a difficult thing to quantify and a difficult thing to get behind. But I think that it's so important that we talk about the way that society affects these students. Like I've heard it mentioned several times that this isn't human trafficking isn't just about individual action, right? It's about the society that drives this. It drives the demand. The way that we treat one another and look at one another as human beings drives the demand. And we refer to human trafficking as modern day slavery, right? But we can't ignore the fact that slavery thrived and prevailed because of these false beliefs about some people being more worthy than others. It wasn't just about money, it very much was, but there were also these social beliefs and social norms that are so harmful, and now we see that manifesting again in human trafficking. We have to take a stand and change that conversation. So help us to advocate for comprehensive health education. help us to advocate for culturally responsive and trauma-informed approaches to education in general, and help us to advocate for deeper integration between all of our services in education, healthcare, social services, that we're all sharing data, sharing resources, so that we can really do what's best for the students. Because then when it really comes down to it, you look at these risk factors of social isolation, trauma, and economic hardship, we can work together to invert the pyramid and form community, healing, and opportunity that's really going to assist our students in thriving instead of being driven toward human trafficking. Thank you.
Boatload of Slidos here, so I'm going to try to make sure that I get to everybody. Please add more. We have about, if I get this right, we have about 10 minutes of Slidos to go. So I'm going to start with, well, we have some people who want to connect with the task force in Los Angeles County. I'm going to have you chase these two fine people down after the presentation, if I may, to do that. And the next question is for Lester. Have you met others from the Filipino Migrant Center that have been trafficked, and what advice do you give to them?
Yeah, we meet a lot of victims of human trafficking, trafficking survivors as well. Yeah, and I convince them to, to join in our organization to reach out more possible victim of human trafficking, so we're able to help them. Because based our experience, I know there's a lot more that are scared and hiding, and yeah, we encourage them to come out their shadow, to stand up and seek justice. So,
thank you, Lester. For Heidi, if you are able to recognize the signs and report a child who may be a trafficking victim, how are they tracked if they are being moved around?
That's a good question. So what happens, at least in our emergency department, is if, say, a kid is being moved around, but in our ER we recognize that they're being trafficked, then that's the end of the moving. We intervene right then and there. So physicians can actually place kids in Missouri on 24-hour hold, so we can admit them to our hospital, and we find a safe place for them. So we're not going to let them leave our care and go back out to their trafficker, especially since they're a minor. We have the control to do that.
Thank you. And I'm just do a quick follow-up because we've got one jumped in. How do we access the screening tool you referenced, and who responds when you report?
Yeah, great. Also great questions. If you want to come talk to me afterwards, I'm happy to email you that screening tool and just some helpful tidbits we've learned with it. And we report to Child Protective Services, local law enforcement where the crime is taking place, and it can be multiple places, and then the human trafficking hotline, and kind of collaborate together to figure out a safety plan for this child.
Thank you. Stephen, what resources are in place in schools in OCDE for LGBTQ youth who are suicidal?
That's a great question. And so that's actually a gap area for us, and one that we're working toward fixing. Right now, I'm part of an equity task force, essentially at OCDE, to undergo cultural proficiency training, identify an action plan for us as an agency to see how can we drive better outcomes for all students, including their behavioral health and their social and emotional learning. But you are correct that that is a big gap area. We did host a gathering, I think it was basically a year ago in March, where we were talking about cultivating safe and welcoming schools for LGBTQ youth. Where we were collaborating with the local LGBT center and other folks to come forward and bring some learning and professional resources. But that is still an area that needs growth. There is OC Accept with the healthcare agency we're trying to develop closer working relationships with. But yeah, that's definitely a growth area for us. We do have a very robust team working on child welfare and attendance and student services that's constantly pushing the envelope on bringing more and more services to our students through the districts. But we'll keep working on it, absolutely.
And I believe Waymakers, are you still the housing of the county suicide hotline, or am I wrong about that? Do you know? Camille, do you know that? You still don't do that? Okay.
Well, there's the NAMI warm line, but that administered by the healthcare agency that was
The
mentioned
healthcare
earlier.
agency does that now? Okay,
Yeah.
my bad. I thought they were still doing it. There's the most popular question right now is what happens to people who are trafficked when they're discovered, and I think they're talking mostly about foreign nationals. That's a really big question. And we're going to pass on that. There are a lot of different workshops tomorrow. The bottom line is this: they're not deported. If your foreign national is found who's been labor trafficked or sex trafficked, they are not deported. They're connected with services. They have a lot of different types of relief that can be offered to them that allows them to stay in the country, including continued presence, including T&U visas, including home, shelter, and different financial resources, both at the federal and state level, that allow them to stay here and be treated for any kind of psychological or social issues they need to be treated for, and eventually if they want to have any kind of law enforcement or civil cases pursued for what happened to them during the trafficking incident. So that's a big general question. It's really hard for me to farm it to a particular person here. So I'm going to let that go. And there was a question, what happened to the people in the news report? Was their case investigated?
So it was interesting because when they came to me, I thought the show segment would end with the Global Horizon case. And instead they said, we just got this tip and we're going to go out to Monterey Park. You want to do a ride along with us? And I said, no. That's not how it goes. You should actually, check in with law enforcement. I knew they were going to check in with law enforcement. So I said, if you are going to talk to people, and this is in the San Gabriel Valley, bring along Mandarin speakers. You have to not do the typical thing, which is, are you a victim of human trafficking? Because no one's going to say yes. Why don't you talk about labor, employment? Get them to talk about it. And so they ended up talking about that. What was interesting is that question about, can you go back to China at any time? And I think that was the tip of the iceberg. And you got the reaction at that point that something was strange. I mean, you also hear the other part about him every 2 weeks would move around. So that's another red flag. I will say, I can't comment on pending investigations, but that is a well-known location, an area. I think the trick with that is actually trying to make sure that agencies don't step on each other's toes, because there's a lot of angles to investigate. And it's not clear from the Today Show, but it's an apartment building, it's also a hub, there's recruitment agencies around, there's a lot of things going on. So, but that to me is a typical example of what's on the horizon, because folks are being brought in very systematically under temporary worker visas. This is not an undocumented situation. And then they're being moved through LA to the rest of the country. And so this is a deeper enterprise problem that we're seeing.
Thank you, Juan. There was a question about someone saying earlier there 95% of trafficking is sex trafficking, and this afternoon there's claims to be a lot more than labor trafficking. Those are two different numbers being confused. So there are 95% of sex trafficking is being prosecuted. So of the prosecutions in the federal system, 95% is sex trafficking, 5% is labor. Of the victims being served in different victim service organizations, a majority of those have been labor trafficking victims. So that's where you're getting, I apologize for any confusion that was listed along the way there. So this one for you, Lester. Does your program help relocate and employ labor traffic victims? Does your program help relocate or employ any of your trafficking victims that you find?
Yeah, our program is like when we reach them, and then connect to the lawyer to process the paper, and also refer them to like Salvation Army for the transitional housing, and also for the connection with some learning center who give them knowledge to do like culinary or some based on connection. Also for some because our mission is uphold the rights and welfare of most especially the victims of human trafficking. So we really need to know their condition and the basic needed. And yeah, if we learn the basic needed, so we refer a different organization to able to help them as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm slow in my old age. I want to make sure we're getting this right. On Arena, do you have any information on how the LA Task Force is addressing the LA garment arena or area, and how about labor trafficking or anything like that?
Sure. We're just scratching the surface with labor trafficking, unfortunately. There are garment agency task forces, garment industry task forces, and there are also private industry leaders who are attending labor trafficking task force meetings. For instance, there are a few garment manufacturers who have a coalition that includes Lucky Brands and I think it's 7 for All Mankind. And they attend meetings to get information on labor trafficking and also to inform their auditors who look at supply chains and ensure that there's no trafficking in their supply chains. But we have a long way to go with the garment industry. It's really complex. There are a lot of garment manufacturers that don't even look like businesses, so they evade inspections, and so it's a large problem that I think can be addressed in some respects by legislation, but we also need to come up with models. For instance, we're working right now on a pricing model where we can determine, based on the price of a garment, whether it could have been produced without labor exploitation. So these are things that we're working with academics and economists on. So hopefully we can make a larger dent in the problem.
Thank you. And at this time, I know there are a few more questions that you put in Slido, and I apologize for not getting to them all, but I did promise a little time for Helen Bacco. So I'd like to take this moment, if we can give a round of applause to our panel and the time they've taken today. Also, I'd like to remind you that many of these folks are going to be, come on up, Helen, all the way around. You can get up on the big stage here. Also, a lot of these folks have workshops, and please take advantage of the opportunity tomorrow to do that. Let me go, Kyle. So we're really fortunate to have a group of folks from Nigeria with us, and we're going to ask Helen to tell their story. So Helen, come on over.
Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be here and to introduce my friends. But first of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Morgan for this opportunity. We have our First Lady from my own home state in Nigeria, Mrs. Asma'u Yahaya Inwa. If you can stand, please. Can you also, I know she's shy, can you also come forward? Come up here. And then I have Ms. Asma'u Mohammed Iganas. She's one of the members of House of Assembly from Gombe State. And then I also have Ms. Amina Yahaya, Ms. Amina Ibrahim Melafia. She's a bank manager from Nigeria. So they all flew in yesterday from Nigeria to attend this meeting. And by the way, they are all from northern Nigeria, and a lot of you have heard things about what is happening in northern Nigeria. But as they were listening to the messages, to the different informations, they started telling me that, you know, the US is far ahead. But in Nigeria, especially from our own state, the Child's Right Act has not been passed at all. So you're talking about human trafficking, you're talking about sexual abuse. If there is no legislation, how can they help the children over there we have lots of judges here. We have, community workers, and we have, support staff from all over the place. And the First Lady has been participating in encouraging our state to pass the Child's Right Act. But Ms. Asmau introduced the bill, and I just want them, to talk a little bit about what they are doing right now in order to encourage our state government to at least pass that bill so that they will be able to address all these issues. And the First Lady has taken part in, taking a role in encouraging the government, and I would like her to say, to greet you and just tell you a little bit of what she did.
Good evening, all. Thank you so much, Dr. Megan. We appreciate you giving us this time. In Gombe State, Nigeria, we have the prevalence of violence against women and children. And we have a prevalence of out-of-school girls. So now I don't want to talk much. I just want to tell you the little we started. We started advocating for our state to pass the Child Right Act, so that we hope with that we curb the violence against women and especially children. With that, in December, I think specifically 10th of December, we had a walk. We gathered a lot of women and children, even a lot of youths joined us. So we had a walk from our stadium to the State House of Assembly. We were advocating for them to help us pass the Child Right Act. Let me not talk much because the time is limited. Thank you very much.
So she participated in walking. She organized the youth so that they walked and tried to encourage people. And now our legislator who has pushed the bill, I'll ask her to talk a little bit about what she's doing, and also part of what she wanted to do is to ask, there are so many resources here, how can all the resources here help our own representative push that bill back in Nigeria to be passed?
Hello, everyone. My name is Honorable Asmau Iganus from Northeast Nigeria, Gombe State to be precise, a member in the state, the only female state legislator. You can now see the reason why Thank you. That's why when we heard about the Ensure Justice conference, the First Lady herself said we need to be here because we know we will get so many things from our sister, Mrs. Morgan, to take home. I, as a state legislator, we need to pass this bill of Child Right Act in my state. So I talked about sensitizing our people, because of these social-cultural issues from where I come from. Women are being relegated. We are only seen, we are not heard. So I need to sensitize. We need to organize on how to sensitize the people, let the populace know this is what we were going to pass into law. So they will accept it from the traditional institution, religious institution. We'll work together, we'll make it an open door policy for us to have a public hearing before I could now continue on the process of passing the bill. It's easier that way, and the governor also is so much involved because Her Excellency too is interested, but the people we are representing must be carried along. So what we want is, we understand where we're coming from. The women are relegated. We have this Child Right Act. We have traumatized children that because of poverty, that they are depressed, they go into drugs, they are lured into criminal activities. For that, we need, if possible, any collaboration where we can see how we can pick it up so that it will be an easy passage of the bill in the Assembly. We appreciate your time given to us. We know the women are relegated because most of them are illiterate, and we have this issue of teen pregnancies everywhere. So many issues. Because of time factor, I just need to stop there. But we are doing all we could possible to make sure that this bill is being passed smoothly, and the governor, His Excellency Alaji Inuwa Yahaya, is behind it. But we need to carry our people along so that it will not have any issue when we are passing the bill. So we need you to support us in any way you can. Thank you for your time.
Again, Dr. Morgan, thank you so much for inviting our leaders, our women leaders from Nigeria. And again, as you've heard, whatever help you can render, whatever advice you can render, I know there are so many groups here who really appreciate it so that this bill will be passed in Gombe State. Thank you once again.
I want to thank Helen. I met you a decade ago. That's right. And she brought 40 representatives from Nigeria for a conference here. And every year, Nigeria is represented in our conference. So you're our sisters. And we especially applaud the only woman in the assembly. And we also want to promise that we will send you home with all of the tools and resources that we represent at this conference. Thank you for honoring us with your presence. One more hand for them. Before Derek closes out this session, I want to tell you a couple of things. If you did not download Sketch, it is not too late. Sketch will show you the new schedule, although we'll have PowerPoint tomorrow, for some of the changes in the workshops. Erin Albright is going to do a workshop on coercion. If you work with these kids and you can't figure out why they do what they do, go to that workshop. Dr. Shively will take Don Hawkins' place, and Derek Marsh, I think you're taking the Laura Letter session.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, and he'll be talking more about labor trafficking. Also, I want you to know that many of our presenters today have been featured on the Ending Human Trafficking podcast. How many of you listen to the Ending Human Trafficking podcast? Oh, we have to change that. By tomorrow, I'm going to ask that question again, and I better see a lot more hands. An and Rena did a fabulous podcast, and Heidi, absolutely, all the links to the things she was talking about are in the show notes. And Stephen, you're on my list, just so you know. Thank you so much, Lester, for coming as well. I'm also supposed to tell you that the Vanguard students who are meeting people for dinner afterwards will meet here at the foot of the stage. You get the privilege of sending them home.
Well, number one, I want to thank you all for attending today and taking the time out of, I know, our busy schedules for everyone. And for the students, I know you don't really have busy schedules, but thank you for coming anyway. Ouch, right, I'm sorry. Number two, that's mean, sorry. I get picked on a lot. I got to pick on other people. It makes me feel better inside. Number two, I want to thank all the panelists who took the time out of their busy schedules, and I want to give them all a round of applause for making today what it can be.